All right, time is up. And away we go, right? Very similar here. Things are happening fast. Rebekah's a decisive woman. You know that because when she was approached by the servant asking if she wanted to come back and marry a man she'd never met, she agreed. She left the next day. She's a very decisive woman. She does what she thinks is right, and whatever God is leading her to do, she does. So she overheard Isaac and Esau, and she knew that arguing with her stubborn husband was no value. If he wouldn't listen to the oracle of God, he wasn't going to listen to her. And so she's going to do something about it. And she comes up with a plan. And you might think that this plan is kind of half-baked, but I'll tell you this. I know I've read the rest of the story. It works. So it wasn't that bad a plan. Her problem is that this is not her business. This was God's prophecy, not her prophecy. It was up to him to fulfill it. And she didn't have to worry that Isaac, who was a mere mortal, could somehow thwart the plan of God. But she was afraid somehow. She seemed to think that maybe Isaac could do it. And Jacob's her favorite son, and his values and interests were similar to hers. So he was entirely different than Esau. Esau cared very little about his marriages that were an insult to the family, and Jacob, she knew, wouldn't do such a thing. So she thought probably she needed to do something, and she came up with something. Now, one possible motive that Rebekah may have had, we don't know this is a fact, but she could have thought to herself, now, if he goes ahead and does this, God's going to have to do something to make his prophecy come true. What's he going to do? Because his prophecy said that Jacob was going to be the one who received the blessing, that he's the one who would carry on the line, in effect, that he's the one that would eventually produce the messianic line. He's the firstborn as far as God's concerned. He gets the double share of the property. What's he going to do? Well, one thing he could do is kill both Isaac and Esau. That'd work. Then Jacob be the only one left. Now, if she feared that, then this plan makes a little more sense. It's possible. But more likely, I think she thinks that Isaac can just defeat the plan of God. I think she thinks that when Isaac says his words of blessing, that they bind God, that God's going to say, well, I didn't want you to say that. I guess I have no choice now, though you said it. So, and you're very powerful, Isaac, and I'm just a mere little God here. And so I've got to do. If you're going to speak it, then I've got to do it. I see that kind of thinking in the modern church. Sometimes there are people who say, my words have power, and I have to be careful that I don't utter them carelessly. Well, I'll agree with the careless part, but your words don't have any power unless God gives them power. You understand that, right? I've seen prayer power. That's what I want. Prayer of powers. And you read it in the back of the book. Read that book. This prayer will defeat all spiritual enemies. Well, how do you know that? Because the wording of it is so good. Well, I don't think so. I think it matters whether you're a believer or not. And my favorite prayer when I'm in trouble as a believer is this one. It's one you can find in the back of the spiritual warfare book. It's easy to remember. I haven't had much trouble memorizing it, so I use it all the time. Ready? We say, Jesus, help me. Okay, there it is. Works really well. I've used it more than once. I've used it in dreams before. I had a dream where I was afraid, and I'd say, Jesus, help me in a dream. My wife would hear me saying it, thinking, what in the world? I'm asleep, and I'm uttering these words. But that's why. Because that's a powerful prayer. Because it is my relationship with Christ that ultimately makes it powerful. And if God doesn't want to give power to your words, then he isn't going to. And so I think she's worried about nothing. She should have stepped back and just let God protect his own plan instead of devising one of her own. I got to give her credit. She's a smart woman. This is a very able plan. It worked. But still, sit back and be quiet and let God do his thing. And it would have been interesting to see what he would have done. By the way, the occasion that caused Isaac to give this blessing is that he's 137 years old. And you would say, now why does that in particular bother him? Because that is how old his brother Ishmael was when he died. 137 years old. And he's thinking to himself, okay, my brother died about this time. I'm not feeling so good myself. I can't see. I probably don't have much longer. I'm going to have to do something. He probably had cataracts or something. He's going to live 40 plus more years. It's amazing. Almost longer he's going to live. But he thinks he might die, and so it's time to bless his oldest son. Esau doesn't deserve the blessing. Esau doesn't really want the responsibilities for most of it. He just wants the blessings of it. He wants the good stuff. He doesn't want to do any of the work. And he had already sold all of his rights to it, stuff that Isaac knew, but he didn't care. So they privately planned a religious ceremony, which included the elements of a feast. And usually everyone else in the family would come to the feast, but nope, just the two of them. Going to have some of that venison stew that only Esau can prepare. Keep that in mind. Going to have some of that stew only Esau can make. He is a foolish old man, really. And foolish old men are easily fooled. He'd already lost one of his senses. He couldn't see. And he's confident, though, he can trust the rest of them, all the other four. But there are people I know who have told me that they don't believe there's a God. And I say, well, why not? Because I can't see him. Can't hear him, can't touch him. Don't have any, none of my senses can pick him up, so he must not be there. I think there are plenty of other senses that you're not using, including your common sense. I mean, the stew, right? Only Esau can make the stew. Go out and hunt me some of those animals that only you can hunt, and make some of that stew that only you can make. What's Rebecca doing? She's making the stew. And she's making it out of goats. Go hunt me a couple of tame goats. Bring them in, baby goats even. And she's going to make some of that stupid stew that he thinks is so cool that only his son can make. And that is so much like a wife. I can make that stupid stew of his that he thinks that no one else can make. And he won't be able to tell the difference. How many moms have said that to their children? So she's off making it. She can fool his sense of taste, and she knew she could fool his sense. She wasn't even worried about that part. And by the way, Jacob didn't say, well, he'll be able to tell the difference between that stew and Esau's stew. He knew better, too. Probably the whole family knew it was a joke. But they let them have their little secret. Now, Jacob was worried more about Dad's sense of touch because Esau was Chewbacca. I mean, he's a very hairy man, and, Jacob is kind of ordinary in that regard. But she knew that she could fool her husband with the skin of a young goat. I just think that's amazing. I mean, Esau feels like a goat? I guess so. But all you got to do is wear the skin of a goat. And if you want to smell like him, all you got to do is wear his clothing. So the only thing that's left is the sound of the voice. Now, for me, if if you know twins, their voices sound alike to you unless they're your kids. Because I have noticed that. When the parents of twins can tell them apart on the phone, most of the time. But I can't. When I hear them, they sound exactly the same to me. So this is a little scary. It's going to be similar, but parents can usually tell the difference between their twins' voices. And Jacob was worried. He didn't like this scheme. And his mother said, you'll do it because I told you to do it. He should have refused, though, and said, look, I'm a 40-year-old man. I don't have to do what you tell me. And I'm not doing this. So I'm going to let God protect his own plan. But he didn't. So he went and got him. And he brought him to his mom. And his mom made the food. And then she got Esau's clothing. I don't know how come she had that. And she put the skins of the goats on his hands, on his arms, on his neck. Oh, man, he had a hairy neck, too. Anyway. You like this story. And so he comes to his dad, and his dad says, here I am. And he says, who are you? He says, I'm Esau. I've done as you told me. And he says, how is it you got here so quickly? Okay, lie number one, I am Esau. No, you're not. Lie number two. He said, how did you get here so quickly? He says, because the Lord your God, the Lord your God caused it to happen to me. And that's another lie. It was a good one. God gave me this animal really quick. He was right outside the door, actually. I just went out and shot it. It was like a moose in the front yard. Don't tell fish and game. And then Isaac said, well, come close to me. I can feel you because I'm not sure you're Esau. Now, why would he suspect that? Because this is a family where deceit was commonplace, and he kind of knew that Jacob could do this kind of thing. I'm not really sure you're Esau. He didn't. But he didn't recognize Jacob because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau, so he blessed him. And he said, "Are you really my son Esau?" He said, "I am." Third lie. He said, "All right, well, bring it to me, and I'll eat of my son's game, then I bless you." And he brought it, and he ate, and it tasted just like the stuff that he liked because he's a fool. And they had their little feast together, and he breathed his garments. They smelled just like he's supposed to smell. I'm not sure what he smelled like the field, he said. I'm not really sure that's a great smell. You smell like dead animals. All right, but anyway. And then he blesses him. He says, "Give you the dew of heaven, the fatness of the earth, the abundance of grain. People serve you, nations bow to you, master of your brothers." All this stuff was stuff that Jacob should have received. "Mother's sons bow to you, curse those who curse you, bless those who bless you." That is exactly what Jacob was supposed to receive, that Isaac had intended to give him, or supposed to have given him, but decided instead to give it to Esau. And it was a lie. And there are times when lying is not a sin. The Bible commends the midwives who protected the newborn sons of Israel in Egypt. They lied and lied to Pharaoh. It praises Rahab, who hides the spies of Israel. The principle, I think, is this about lying. Brian's Law, and not just mine, but I've read a lot of books on the subject, and it can distill it to this. It is okay to lie and deceive evil men and women to prevent them from doing evil. So it was okay to lie to the Nazis to hide Christians and Jews from them. Okay? It's okay to lie to a serial killer who's looking for a victim. It's okay to deceive evil people to keep them from doing evil. But Jacob's lies here, I'm not going to defend. He didn't need to do any of this. He didn't have to pretend to be Esau, because he's going to receive this blessing anyway, no matter what Isaac did. And the lie that people really get on Jacob for isn't even the one where he says that he's Esau when he isn't. The lie they get on him for is for saying that God provided him the game so quickly. They say, "Blasphemy! Blasphemy for giving God credit for that when in fact he had nothing to do with it." And I say, "Oh, give me a break." I've heard a lot of blasphemy like that in churches. Really, if that's blasphemy. Because they say things like, "God has provided us you name it, a big gift." In fact, I wined and dined the rich person, and I told him that he would have influence and power in the church if he'd give us a huge gift of $100,000. And he did. But we're not saying it that way. We're going to say, because it sounds better, God has given us a huge gift from the rich person. Or God has provided us this opportunity, or God has told us to do this or that. And so many times I've heard that, and I think to myself, God didn't have anything to do with that. You're just trying to manipulate your congregation. They're lies, okay? But they're common lies. Don't stop calling them blasphemy. Jacob's lie is clever because he made it up on the spot, okay? You really got to give him some credit for that. I mean, if you guys lies go, it was a very clever lie. How come you got the game so quickly? Oh man, I got to think of something. I'll get back to you on that one. No, he came up with it right away. Well, God gave it to me. He's clever like his mom. Now, I'm not saying he did the right thing at all. It's not acceptable to lie because it was unnecessary. Yes, Isaac intended to do evil and that he was going to give the blessing to the wrong kid. But that was God's problem, not anybody else's. No one else was really going to be hurt by this. There was no imminent danger to anybody else. So it's a dangerous thing to do, to try to do something that God didn't want you to do. And I'd just say let him try. Because I suspect what would happen is that God would have performed a Balaam on him. You remember the story of Balaam? Balaam tried to prophesy against the nation of Israel, and out would come good things. He tried to curse Israel, and out come blessings. I think the same thing would have happened if he had tried to bless Esau. Instead, he would have said something entirely different. That's all he had to do was wait. The problem is that they don't really know the Word of God like you and I do. They don't know the story of Balaam. Jacob doesn't. Rebekah doesn't. We do. We should, anyway. We need to know the Word of God if you want to know God, and that includes the Old Testament, New Testament, and everything that God has had to say. Jacob still has a lot to learn about God, and you